All right, let's move on to learning objective 3, at least with the materials that I use in class. And what we're doing in this portion of the material is we're attempting to differentiate between what we call a traditional plant-wide overhead allocation policy, where we take our overhead, our estimate of our overhead, we plot that as a numerator, and then we come up with a single predetermined overhead rate based upon the most relevant cost driver. And so, if you're watching this video on activity-based costing, it is, I hope, that you've had a chapter on doing that already. Perhaps it was an introductory chapter into manufacturing, or job order costing type chapter, something like that. But hopefully this is not the first time you've seen overhead rates. And so again, when you probably already had this material, but a traditional, so anytime you see traditional manufacturing or traditional overhead application, single overhead rate or plant-wide rate, these are all ways of saying we're going to take our overhead and we're going to divide by the most relevant cost driver that we can find. We're also going to be talking about something called departmental rates, which is a deviation of traditional costing. And then we're going to compare those two with activity-based costing. So let's get started. This video will probably be 2 to 3 questions. One of them is a true-false question. So let's see what we've got here. On this particular handout, we're at question number 12. And it says the plant-wide rate approach is the simplest to apply, but is also the costliest to implement compared to a departmental or activity-based cost allocation system. Okay, so think about that for just a moment. Pause it, read it if you need to. All right, and this is a false statement. But we want to make sure that we understand that we were doing okay initially. Plant-wide rate approach is the simplest to apply. We don't have to break our overhead down into multiple parts. We only have one single cost driver, so it is the simplest to apply. However, it is also the cheapest to apply, or the least costly to apply. So that's where we went off the rails. Let's see here. Question 13 looks like a calculation question, and we've talked about this before. A lot of figures, lots of numbers that we're looking at here. So, probably want to look down here at the question first. It says, what are the total overhead costs assigned to job 302? So we know that it's about a single job, and we also want to make sure that we understand that we're only dealing with overhead costs. Now, we may or may not have additional information such as direct labor costs or materials costs included. What we want to make sure as soon as we read this question down here is we are talking about overhead costs in total, but for one job. Okay, so with that in mind, let's see what we have here in the question. It says, the following information is available pertaining to division that uses a plant-wide overhead rate based on machine hours. Okay. So what you need to be thinking at this point in time is, I've done this before, because you've had a chapter on this. If you haven't, you shouldn't be on this chapter. So a plant-wide rate is a single rate, and the single rate is machine hours. Okay. So notice we have multiple departments in this particular division. But what we're going to focus on is our total overhead cost of $103,500. $500. Okay, and that's that's really very very important. And then we also want to look at how many machine hours we use in total, because it says that we use a single plant-wide overhead rate based on machine hours. So we can just kind of scratch through or ignore this direct labor hours information. So it becomes very simple. You've done this before again. As far as how we would calculate this, we would say I have $103,500. That's our estimate of overhead cost. And then I'm going to use the total machine hours. And so I'm going to calculate a rate here per machine hour. So 1035, that's my total estimate of overhead, divided by 4,500 machine hours, gives me a rate of $23 per machine hour. Okay. And now all I really have to do is I have to say, okay, with regard to this job 302 here, how many machine hours do I have in total? And it tells me right here, I've got 9. I've got 5 in the mixing department that I'm going to incur, and then I've got 4 in the finishing department. So all I have to do now is do a very, very basic multiplication problem, and I would say that based upon this scenario, I'm going to allocate $207 of overhead to job number 302. So think about that for a moment. Our total overhead is 1035. This job is incurring $207 of that. So this is a fairly small job in the overall scheme of things. And we're going to have a lot of them, probably somewhat similar. And hopefully by the time that we're done, hopefully, this plant-wide rate, that introduces some inaccuracies, but hopefully we won't be too far off of what our actual overhead ends up being. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Let me kind of erase this. I think I am using a copy that I did not intend to use. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. Question number 14. Again, same situation. We've got an awful lot of writing here that we're having to go through. So I'm going to drop down and I'm going to go to as far as I can, and it says the department overhead rates for the design and production departments in June were. So now I don't have any idea what the answer is yet, but I at least know what they're wanting from me, and now I can start reading. Because there could be information that I can ignore in here. Don't know yet. Decca Electronics Company produces 2 products, resistors and transistors, in a small manufacturing plant, which had total manufacturing overhead of $21,000 in the month of June. Okay, so they said that they had total manufacturing overhead costs of $21,000. So sometimes in activity-based costing, they focus on actual overhead versus estimated overhead. Don't let that bother you. The mechanics are the same. The factory has 2 departments: design, which incurred $10,000 of the overhead, and production, which incurred $11,000. The design department used 200 hours of direct labor, and production used 80 machine hours. Now, we don't quite yet know if this is going to matter or not. Looks like they are trying to confuse us a little bit. It says during June, 100 direct labor hours were used in making 100 units of resistors and 150 direct labor hours were used in making 100 units of transistors. If DECA Company uses a department rate based on direct labor hours for design department and machine hours for the production department, the department overhead rates for the design and production departments in June were. Okay, so before we answer this question, we need to recognize what we're doing here. We're taking this company and we're breaking it down into two departments, and we're saying that for the design department, their primary driver of cost is direct labor hours. But for the production department, we're going to, I guess the production process is automated. Our primary driver is machine hours. So the departmental rate approach is a little bit more similar to traditional plant-wide overhead allocation processes. You're going to use one single cost driver per department. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Those are going to be different cost drivers, and they tell us that here. We said that we're going to use, again, machine hours for production, direct labor for the design department. Okay? So with that in mind, I want to mention this area right here is irrelevant information. It's irrelevant information. We don't really care about all of this because what we're trying to do, again, is determine overhead rates. We're not trying to apply overhead in any way, shape, or form here. So that's very, very important. So they have done actually a lot of this work for us. What we want to recognize here is that design had $10,000 and we incurred 200 direct labor hours in that month. So let's see here now. I'm going to push this up just a little bit. Design, 10,000 of our 21,000 divided by 200 hours of direct labor. And then I also want to write down here production, $11,000 divided by 80 machine hours. And we're going to get our two rates here. And that's all we're going to need. So $10,000 for design cost divided by 200 direct labor hours is $50. And then for production, we have $11,000 in overhead divided by 80 machine hours. And that's going to give us a rate of $137.50. And so now, since this is a multiple choice question, we have to see if this is one of the answer choices. And actually it's the last one, $50 per direct labor hour for design and $137.50 per machine hour for production. And answer choice D is definitely going to be our answer. All right, this video is starting to get a little lengthy, so we will cut this off and come back with another video right away.